Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Camara, and welcome to Chanel and Jordan, who are my partners in crime in this afternoon's conversation. So Jordan and Chanel are in line with today's, theme, are students who will also share some of their experiences as part of living through this module that I designed a few months ago. So as we begin this conversation around learning beyond a grade and reimagining assessment, and in this particular case, I'll be talking about postgraduate assessment, something which I think has come up over and over again in this conference. The one thing that I think we are all in agreement with is that we need to rethink assessments and reimagine them, not only for online, but for the kind of world that is quickly and fast heading into the fourth industrial revolution. Now, I want to talk about learning beyond a grade, not only from a lecturer perspective, because it is agreed that we do want to infuse into our kind of learning design, the kind of assessment that would be both relevant and responsive. But I also, when I say this, I know it will resonate with many of the lecturers that are online at the moment, that for students, it has really been a need to shift the mindset away from the end result, the mark, so that students start to focus on the learning that they've done, no matter what the mark looks like, and also on the kind of feedback that is provided to them so that that learning can be extended beyond the mark. So the question then becomes, how do we move student thinking beyond a grade? And what I'm about to share today is likely to go into that domain. Now, before we get started, I have a short Mentimeter exercise which I'd like you guys to respond to. And the question that I'm asking is, what sorts of assessments have you designed, in your teaching journey, whether it has been online or offline? There is a link in the chat that you can use. Otherwise, I've been wonderfully introduced to these QR codes that our colleagues have helped us to get a flair for in yesterday's escape room exercise. So I put that also in case there's some of you that want to use your phones to get into the Mentimeter exercise. I'm just going to give people, a minute or two to just get into the exercise, and then I want to share the result before actually moving on. So please go ahead and just respond to that question. So the answers seem to be coming up, and there's a few people who have already started to respond. And what I would want to do now is to basically share some of the responses to that Mentimeter exercise, just to see where everybody is in the room. So here we go. Here's a whole bunch of responses that have come through in terms of that Mentimeter exercise, and people are talking about formative assessments, portfolios, offline kinds of assessment, play and gaming, application to theory, to scenarios, quizzes, interactive videos, and so forth. So there's a lot of examples of the kind of assessments that that people are subscribing to, and so it falls very much in line to the very many kinds of examples that one would expect when you think about designing the kind of learning for our students today. However, there are three categories within which assessments have become popularized. And I'm sure that this is no secret to you, that you've come across this concept of assessment of learning, which, as you can see from this wonderful little graphic representation, you've got assessment of learning, you've got assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment that is learning. Now, assessments are wonderful enablers because they enable students and the lecturer to a large extent to engage with learning materials in ways that allow skills development, but also allows a production of knowledge to a large extent, depending on how these assessments are designed. So whether it's designed for learning, as learning, or whether it is learning, I think this of learning part has become very much something that we have foregone over a long period of time. But whatever else assessments do achieve, they have to equip students to learn beyond the academy. So this idea of assessments for lifelong learning is something that has come about, particularly in recent times, when we start to think about the kind of 21st century skills development that is required, in today's kind of world. For those of us that have gone through a learning journey in the last 2 years, not just with us designing learning programs and modules and learning, designing for online, but also as we have navigated that space with our kids and our community members at home. One of the things that we ourselves, through the forced opportunity of COVID-19, have had to experience is we had to also learn on the job, and we also had to engage with this concept of lifelong learning and getting out of comfort zones. Now, Bode and his partner in crime, Nancy Falchikov, in 2006 already wrote an article that introduces the concept of assessment for lifelong learning. And through some of the research that they had done, they had come up with 10 criteria that an assessment needs to fulfill in order to, tick the box of being assigned as an assessment for lifelong learning. And the 10 criteria, I use these little icons to kind of demonstrate what the criteria is, because these will emerge in our other slides, and so you can then make the connection and the link. And so the first thing that they say as part of the criteria is that an assessment must engage with the outcomes, but also with a problem analysis. That there must be some kind of an emphasis on context, that it has to involve working in association with others. So the whole Vygotskian idea of social learning, that it has to have authentic representations and productions, which is a lot of what we spoke about over the last 2 days around what sorts of assessments. And I remember the keynote by Thea de Wet and others in that panel, where authentic representations and productions seem to have been something that everybody has been advocating for and also experimenting with. That it promotes transparency of knowledge, and some of the examples that I'm about to share will show you how this is possible. That it fosters reflexivity, it builds learner agency and constructs active learners. Again, this one here is not a new one to us, but something about learner agency is something that one needs to contemplate here. And that it considers the risk and confidence of judgment. And again, here, the examples that I'm going to be sharing with you would show you how this could be done and how this could be reviewed. That it promotes the seeking of appropriate feedback. And again, it's not only just formal feedback from a lecturer or from whoever's marking the assignment, but also from a wider community of peers and people outside of the classroom. And that it requires portrayal of outcomes for different purposes, that you could extend whatever the assessment is across an array of different spaces. So let's head, using these 10 criteria that I came across in the Bode and Valchikov article, let's head across to see how that played out for us in 2020. Now, the department in which I work with engages with only online programs, and we run a Master's in Education, Leadership and Management program in which the module Future Trends in Education, Leadership and Module is a 7-week duration module that gives a student 15 credits. There's a series of about 8 of these modules before students are ready for the dissertation phase. I teach this module with the primary focus to explore the current education landscape, and the idea is that you can use the past and the present to project into the future from a theory, research, and practice perspective. In other words, the idea being, how do you prepare people to become future fit leaders? In this regard, this particular module works to develop skills in 2 ways. Masters is generally sort of aligned to a researcher development, But in our module, we find that we are not only developing researchers, but we are also developing leaders. Some of them are future leaders and some of them are already in leadership positions. So the enhancement of their skills is from both perspectives, from both a practice as well as a research perspective. And we're looking at what's current, what's trending, what's relevant, what's responsive, and how do they lead up to the kind of leadership that's required for an uncertain future. So in this regard, when thinking about the future, one has to realize that we live in a very sort of shifting sands kind of world. So what's trending now may not necessarily trend tomorrow. The world is changing in every moment of every day, especially when you're considering the future. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis of it, pushed us into that realization, which is becoming more and more nuanced as one begins to contemplate the fourth industrial revolution. We also know that knowledge is abundant, and again, it came up from the controversy piece in our keynote. So how do you start to use that knowledge and what is relevant for the South African context, especially within the fourth industrial revolution, today, tomorrow, and in the future? And then more importantly, how can we learn from and with one another? I think another gift of COVID was the idea that we could also learn from students, and students could learn from us, that we could learn from community members and from others out there. And in fact, if you go to any school right now, a lot of the young people have been given the lead in the digital development of schools per se. And then, of course, the big idea of how can learning continue beyond a grade, a module, and a program. And for me, the most important part was about personalizing learning. So these were some of the questions that I was thinking about beyond the Bode and Valchikov article. So there were 4 assessments in this module, and each one of them was put within the criteria, these 10 criteria that was advocated for by those authors, within that research of assessment for lifelong learning. And I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit of detail, just so that you can see what exactly is it that we achieved. So the first assessment was a newspaper article that the students had to develop. And they had to choose some kind of leadership topic that was appropriate for their context, for their world that was happening right now. And they had to talk about something or choose a particular area that was of interest to them personally. And then they had to use this personal experience together with other materials that they would pick up by way of research and create a newspaper article that made their thoughts and their research palatable to an everyday audience. Again, another COVID gift was the fact that newspapers and the media and so forth were fraught with all kinds of research. I mean, if I were to sit down and ask people about fourth waves and what all the different science related to the vaccine is and all the debates around education, I mean, those have become part and parcel of our everyday media experience. And so I wanted students to engage as part of that. And then for them to share their thoughts and ideas if they wanted to. This was not a forced thing in a public or media platform. And what then happened is that you have series. I have an example here of Mr. Leon Roots. He's an HOD, a physics HOD at one of the schools, who actually took some things that he was involved with and he was thinking about in terms of developing this article and had it published in the Daily Maverick. Again, if one were to go back and consider all of the 10 criteria, again, those 10 criteria were already in place. Then our next assignment was a Twitter conversation with the hashtag future trends. And here we had students engage in the Twitter platform, 50 tweets, 20 responses, 20 retweet tweets, and 5 threads. With this collation of tweets, they had to engage with themselves and network with others. In fact, Professor Marwala, our VC, also engaged with them on that hashtag. And right now at the moment, as I speak, about 64% of students still continue to use the hashtag and continue with conversations there. And then from the collation of tweets that they had then collated together and put together by way of information, they then created these infographics that they then shared as part of their discoveries with their peers. And again, very much filling the lifelong learning modem. The last assignment that I really want to go into is where they had to create these digital future fit leadership stories. And here they had to think about future fit leadership and find a role model or find somebody in their community that they then created a 3-minute video of, encapsulating that role model, that person's sort of practice of future fit leadership and how that could link them to the theory that they were learning. So in other words, it was an experience of living the theory. I'll not be playing the video, but I do want to give, they did have a reflection around what that meant to them in terms of the theory. And then I do want to give the conversation over to Chanel and to Jordan to then explain their experiences. So let's go with Chanel first.
Thank you so much, Prof. Kat. So I'd love to share specifically just around my assignment experience of the video assignment of a future fit leader. And I must admit, when I got the brief, I felt quite overwhelmed because I have no experience in digital media. But fortunately, the strength of group members, they had some technical and video skills, and they were able to help with that. And I think that in itself is an essential learning skill in life, that being able to leverage your relationships and networks to get things done and learn from others' experience. So we selected Natalie Maroon as our Future Fit leader, and she is the founding partner and managing director of the performance agency, also known as TPA in Johannesburg. And Natalie has partnered with some of the most successful multinational companies across Africa, Middle East, around the world. And her real focus is on leadership development and culture transformation projects. And all of Natalie's work centers around this critical theme of how do organizations or schools create the environment and the culture and the context in which their people, teachers and staff are really able to thrive, and thrive not only professionally but also personally. And within that process, remain agile and resilient and future fit. And in our conversation with Natalie, she believes that 3 essential things make up a future fit leader. And the first one is lifelong learning. She has the philosophy that everyone is always a teacher and a student. And the second one is embracing digital and technological developments. So always expanding your comfort zone and staying abreast and keep exploring new technology. And the third one is realizing that the era of this kind of single superstar leader is outdated. This old kind of top-down hero approach to leadership that very much worked in the industrial age is no longer effective in our current world of fourth industrial revolution and COVID reality. And if leaders aren't able to pivot to be more authentic and a kind of distributed leadership style, that they lose their relevance really quickly. And it's about leading with and through people. And future fit leaders are able to take their people with them and anchor them in meaningful purpose. And one of the things that really astounded me about Natalie is that she referenced an old book that some of you might know, and it's called The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, as really timeless principles for future fit leaders. I presume that a future fit leader would reference something new and the latest and greatest innovations as to what would you need to do to be a future fit leader. And especially since I'm familiar with, and they're always pushing the boundaries in terms of innovation and best practice. So I was surprised when she mentioned these 4 agreements that are really based on foundational and timeless principles. And she said these are a North Star in terms of how she leads and lives her life every day. And the 4 agreements are, and I really encourage you to perhaps Google them because they actually are very profound, is be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do better. She shared how it's certainly not about being the best, because being the best creates competition and ego, and the best can be quite exclusive, whereas better is deeply inclusive, and it's trying to be a better version of yourself every day. So I was really inspired by Natalie's passion, and my one big key takeout is don't be afraid to ask your role model or hero for some time to chat. I discovered that they actually enjoy sharing their knowledge and they take it as a compliment. And there truly is magic in collaboration and meeting heroes in the flesh who are actually living this theory and shaping the future of leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, Chanel. I know we are quickly running out of time. I apologize. I don't know if you can just squeeze your stuff into a few minutes, into a minute or so, Jordan.
Perfect, no problem. Hello, everybody. So after the assessment that Prof. Yassim had shared with us, I'd embraced this type of learning, hoping to improve my future prospects of, what I've learned in this module, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And since reviewing the assessments, I realized that I've been doing this kind of assessment continuously in my own teaching practices, and help prepare my students for their own academic journey as well. And I found that by teaching beyond the syllabus and sharing knowledge for future learning, created opportunity for integrating other syllabi into my own content as well, which I continuously do. And I find that students grasp deeper understanding on the syllabus-related content. Even students who have been accelerated and put into my more advanced class have used what I have taught in their prerequisite classes, so as to try and balance out. And it just shows that they can learn beyond the classroom and the normal scope of assessment. But not only that, is that I've also applied this unrestricted learning approach to my own personal kind of development and continuously try to improve in the way that I lead. But this has also been evident in the way I've approached my master's degree as well. My leadership role in my own professional development and in my degree have intertwined for the past couple of months, and I've learned that I can shape it specifically to my school environment, and therefore being able to expand on my leadership role in supporting my students wholly in their own journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So in conclusion, guys, these are some of the things that we really wanted to share with you, but more especially that assessment for lifelong learning can be done and it is possible. So thank you for your attention, and sorry, Kimera, for the overtime.